Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you so much for your patience. I know we're a moment or two behind schedule getting started today, but as somebody who's done events for a long time, I will tell you, it's not an event without some sort of technical glitch or delay. So we had a brief little hiccup that we were sorting out, and I thank you for your patience while we got through that. Let's go ahead and get started though. My name is Amber Colson, Event Marketing Manager with Newspire. Today's webinar is Defending the Castle, Building a Multi-Layered Cybersecurity Defense. Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to mention just a few logistical items. Our presentation today should last between 30 to 40 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation using the questions or chat panel that should be there on your screen. You'll receive a recording of today's session via email within the next 48 hours, actually usually pretty much right at the end of this webinar, but I like to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. And additionally, some of you will qualify for a free lunch voucher from us. If you're one of the lucky winners, you can expect to receive an email from me no later than Monday with details. So Amber Colson will be the person sending that email. Keep an eye out for that. I would now like to introduce you to today's speakers. Dan Davis and Brad Wolf, both of Newspire. Dan Davis is our Vice President of Security Operations and Threat Intelligence. He spent 25 plus years managing IT and cybersecurity teams within large enterprises like United Airlines and Walgreens. Brad Wolf is our Vice President, Implementation and Optimization. In addition to Newspire, his career includes technical services and security engineer leadership roles with GB Protect and as an IBM contractor for Cisco. Gentlemen, over to you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. So as we mentioned today, we will be discussing the concept of defending your castle. So through our agenda today, we're looking to set the scene, understand the multi-layered approach. From the multi-layered approach, understand how to assess your risk to your castle, find the weakness in your armor, and go through what it means to run incident response.
Thanks, Brad. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, a little bit of audio challenges this morning. We all know how that goes, right? Or actually, I should say this afternoon. But regardless, welcome everybody. Thanks for queuing that up, Brad. And you know, we think this is a great topic to cover on a regular basis, right? Talking about really the content and the concept of defense in depth. And we thought, I don't know about you, but I've been in this industry a long time. And it tends to get a bit tiring hearing the same kind of concept presented the same way. So we thought, you know what, let's add a little bit of fun here, and let's use a really visual analogy here. And so the one that we thought about here that we thought would be fun to play with here is a concept of defending your castle. And so you can see there on the first picture here. The moniker there, you can't defend a castle with one knight, right? In order to really defend a castle properly, you have to have, lots of different things that are working together, right? You have things like you mentioned, the knights, you have, physical things, right? So we'll, talk about that like from a concept of, physical security, excuse me. Things like a drawbridge, right? A moat, right? A moat is dug around a castle, usually with water in it, sometimes with alligators and other kinds of things in there to keep people from being able to scale the walls, and so on and so forth, right? As you see there in the picture. And so I thought this would be a good way to kind of get our discussion going around, the multiple layers of defense as it pertains to our industry. And keeping in mind, right, as with defending a castle, when you're looking at defending your castle, and obviously your environment, you have to keep, there's similar things you have to keep in mind, right? Which is no one particular or two types of defense for that matter are going to be a comprehensive solution. You have to look across the board and look at different things that will help you protect your castle, if you will. Going back to the concept of knights, right? In our case, to me, a shining knight is a great security professional, right? With good skills and experience and lots of tools to enable them. And you can have all the knights in the world, but if you don't have the right tools and skill sets and process and the culture that enables that, then you're going to be hard pressed to be successful. So why don't we go ahead and move forward to the next slide. So understanding the power of a multi-layered approach, I'm actually going to have Brad step in here and start us off on this particular topic.
Yeah, so really one of the first steps is understanding what is in your castle and what's available to you, what knights are available to you. And with it, here's some examples of modern day cyber defenses, whether you have your perimeter firewalls or even cloud-based firewalls, your antivirus, what's on your endpoint, a SIM service, your anti-spam, your phishing solutions, your IDS, IPS, all of these different solutions out there. And I would consider this as part of your army of knights. So you would have your guards, the knights that are going to be right at that front gate, that drawbridge. You have your warriors, your IDS, your IPS, the systems that are really out there to protect those endpoints. You have scouts that are really looking out into the environment itself to see what's going on. So you have all of these different elements of tools within your environment that have a certain level of efficacy and different purposes for why they're there. So within all of these different tools, they're really targeting what is now and in today's world a much more complex, multi-vector, multi-layer approach, defending against multi-layer and more complex attacks that we're seeing across the industry. We're seeing that attacks are much more persistent. We're seeing attacks are hitting across all 7 layers of the OSI model. So whether it is a physical attack in someone running social engineering campaigns to your environment, to application layer attacks that go all the way up to layer 7, even attacks that are evading through SSL encryption. So there's all of these different elements of attacks that occur, and in your architecture, you have likely a number of different solutions that are all over the place. So if you're dealing with data security, web security, you may be dealing with your network tools. There's a plethora of tools out there. So with that, really starting with your environment, understand what's out there, and it may be a little bit overwhelming to see all of the security tools that you really have at your disposal. So then you get into a question of, well, where do I even start? I have all of these tools. I have this solution, that solution, the other solution. I don't know how it's all connected, what it means, or why it's even there. And I need a place to start to understand how I protect the business.
Yeah, so I'll jump in there if you don't mind, Brad. So kind of working on the right-hand side of the screen, we talk about the concept of, well, what defenses are right for me and for my organization. And as Brad was saying, I think that's really the fundamental question you have to ask yourself. And what I'll sit down, when I meet with clients to discuss, looking at their security posture and how they're going to improve it. And we really do start out with these fundamental types of discussion points. So number one, what's important to you? So, and what I mean by that is what type of environment do you operate in? Brad alluded to a little bit when he was talking about the technology, but more specifically on the business front, your requirements or your priorities for, say, your company does a lot of e-commerce, right? And you're utilizing, so you've got web services and using CARDA, right? Credit card data. Credit card data as part of your normal processing, right? So if you're a company that conducts e-commerce, then you're going to be more concerned around the areas of securing your web environment. That's going to be more of a priority to you. You're going to have to deal with things like PCI, right? And making sure that you protect client data with respect to payment data. That's going to be critical to you, as opposed to, if you're in the healthcare vertical, right? Then those of you who are in that space or have worked in that space, because I have. I worked for one of the biggest health insurance companies in this country in my past, and as you can imagine, right, it's all about HIPAA and everything related to that in the healthcare industry. Or perhaps you're an international company and you have to deal with looking at regulations outside the U.S. So we have our own regulations here in the U.S. that are becoming more prevalent. But you certainly have, I don't know if you've done any work with the European Union, but GDPR has become really big there since its inception, and I want to say it was like 2018, roughly. And then on the heels of that, even here in the U.S., right, California with their privacy laws that came out the next year in 2019, for the last couple of years now, that's been gaining momentum and causing us to have to reflect on how we're going to meet the challenges if you're operating and dealing with businesses and or consumers in California. So it's important to figure out what's your environment that you're having to operate within. So from a regulatory perspective, I think that's a big part of it. And then also, as I mentioned, from what is your main business? Is it e-commerce? Is it is it more around things like your crown jewels might be more of like your data stores and your intellectual property, depending on the type of company you are. And then, of course, the industry or vertical specific security risks, a couple of them that I already highlighted. But there's, of course, our others would be like, if you're in a governmental sector, that, of course, it's a whole other ball of wax, if you will. And there's different standards that would apply to that as well. We can go to the next slide. So, speaking of that, so the catch here, right? When's the last time you stood in the watchtower? I think this is an important aspect that we all, as security practitioners, have to ask ourselves. And so, while we kind of were talking about technology and kind of focusing more on that and the knights, right, our security analysts, we do like to take a step backwards and say, hey, let's look at a higher level, right, a bigger picture, kind of a top down here, people, regulatory and technological. You definitely want to take a risk-based approach when you're looking at your environment. And I don't know, maybe it's just my CISA background, but I would like to think it's probably just more from being a daily practitioner of it. And so let's start with people. So if I'm talking about looking at risk of your environment from a people perspective, there's things like looking at the hiring process, right? There's aspects involved with recruitment, things like background checks, drug testing, processes that might be specific to your business that you want to make sure that you align with. So, for example, some of the companies I've worked for, beyond background checks like validating education and work experience, et cetera, and drug testing, there's also a financial scrutiny that I've had to go under before, like from the concept of like a credit check. And so depending on what business you're in, there's different things that might apply when you're looking at people. But then, of course, it goes beyond just the front end hiring and recruitment, but it's also around developing and maintaining and eventually retaining those people as well. Those are things that you have to keep in the front of your mind as you're working your program. And then regulatory, I did speak to that a little bit previously. The examples I gave, of course, were PCI If you're handling any type of card holder data, that's all around PCI. HIPAA is probably another one of the most common ones related to health information, and then the various privacy laws that I mentioned earlier. Brad, do you want to maybe touch on pick it up from there and talk a little bit more about the technology piece?
Yeah, certainly. So really consider technology to be an enablement factor for your processes that you have within your organization. One of those, as an example, that's a common process, is your patch management process. And the question here is, what technology do you have in place that really supports that process? And do you have validation that your patch management process is successful? And how do you leverage your technology to prove that? You can do so through vulnerability scanning. You can do that through your patch management tools. You can do that through penetration testing. There's several different methods and different ways that you can use technology to validate your processes in place are working and functioning as intended. One of the things that is often seen with technology is that it may be there, but with the plethora of technology solutions out there, no one has the time to go through and configure everything to 100%. And we also see a lot of times to where maybe certain tools are configured to 50, 60% if you're lucky, that there's also a lot of tool overlap to where you may have a technology firewalls, as an example, have UTM functions to where they're able to support not only the firewall function, they're able to support your URL filtering processes so that you can comply to your HR requirements for a safe work environment. You may have tools in place within that firewall that could function as that IDS, IPS. So there may be a lot of tool overlap, or there may be a lot of point-specific tools. So within technology, you want to understand what technologies do you have available at your fingertips, and then with that, analyzing that against the processes that are in place, whether that's regulatory requirements like we mentioned previously, the HR side of it, the people side of it, the protection of the crown jewels. If we're going back to the castle concept, is that really where is the data in your environment? What elements of your environment are critical to you, whether it's information or operations and availability and uptime? And then within those elements that you're identifying as critical, what technology gates are in place to be able to support those people and processes and information?
And then I think I would add to that, Brad. So when you talk, you made the reference back to the castle and the kingdom, right? And looking at the risk within your environment, there's some other resources that I see that people will leverage fairly regularly, and some of those are industry specific insights. And so depending on what industry you're in, I'm aware of many groups out there that have industry specific organizations that they come together just for that, right? As to learn and share information with each other. I'm trying to think of the name of there's a large health system organization that does that. I've worked with clients in the past that have felt like that has provided a lot of value. It'll come to mind. Give me a minute, but I know that there are definitely plenty of industry specific organizations out there that meet regularly, even have conferences that they'll attend, and actually a couple of my colleagues, one in particular down in southern Florida, he and I have talked about their industry's conference, and he values that industry conference over the more well-known industry cyber conferences that a lot of us tend to go to each year. So I think there's a wealth of information even within your own industry that if you have not tapped into, I would encourage you to do so. And then of course there's different models, right? Security structure or frameworks that again, depending on what, not that they're specific to industry, but in my experience, I've seen some that tend to lend themselves with some organizations over others. So, for example, NIST, right? The NIST standard. So that's a government framework, and you tend to see that in more structured organizations that are that have sensitivities to that end. You have the the CMMI. That's another. It's a maturity framework that the ISACA organization owns. Really great content there that definitely spans across multiple industries. The ISO 27000 series, right? That's another great standard. Really good information in there. I've seen that used across industries, but of course it is definitely there's been a focus on manufacturing historically, but it has gone beyond that. So I would definitely encourage you, from a risk perspective, making sure that you're looking at all the available data to you as you help improve your program there. So that being said, it's important as part of your organizational concept to always be looking for weaknesses in your armor. Right? Cybersecurity, just like protecting a castle, there's always that opportunity for someone to get through your defenses. So it's really important to constantly be looking for those weaknesses in your armor, or in our terms, really looking at assessments and what that has to offer. Brad, did you want to maybe speak to it from a security architecture perspective first?
Certainly. So understanding risk in your environment is a key element here. You need to understand what you're protecting against. With that understanding of risk and what it is that you need to protect against, then the first key area to start focusing on is, how do you have visibility against those risks? If you can't see the threat, there's not anything that you're going to be able to do to protect against it. So starting with visibility is key. And again, this is where technology can certainly come into play in order to obtain that visibility. So whether it is information to where you need to protect your endpoints and what your users are doing and what access they have to the important and critical data, whether you have the visibility to the traffic and the application itself and what is coming into and out of the environment. Understanding where your data even lives in your environment can be a challenge, especially if you have a cloud environment. If your organization has grown organically throughout years and years of business and acquisitions, you may have data, you may have important information in several different nooks and crannies of your environment, and even in a cloud environment or multiple cloud environments. So really, it's key to have visibility to the information, those flows, the data flow of where all of this high risk, high profile information may reside. Within that as well, for the tools that are going to obtain that visibility into the environment, you need to be able to make sure that you have an understanding of those tools. Are they configured correctly? Are they set to where all of the settings are logging to the correct log level and log detail? Are they going to provide you the insight that you would need in order to be able to identify the threat to begin with? The next item beyond that is getting into understanding what is occurring on the environment. So you may have tools in place that are monitoring network traffic or monitoring the application, monitoring the layer 7 controls. You need to really be able to understand the output of events and what those log details are going to be providing to you. Within that, you want to normalize it, because the amount of alerts that you can have in an environment can be certainly overwhelming. You need to be able to understand what is considered normal in your environment, what elements and what traffic may be abnormal within the environment, and what you want to start looking at. There's a saying I like to use within cybersecurity. It used to be that you could find a needle in a haystack, and that previously seemed like a daunting task. Someone figured out you just grab a magnet or an IDS, you go to that haystack, you can find that needle. That's not the case anymore. Today, we're dealing with a needle in a stack of needles. So how do you go about all of this information and begin to normalize it? Really, you need to start with the understanding, using this risk-based approach, understand what is at risk, and start prioritizing the information that's related to those risk elements in your environment. within that, once you are able to normalize that and get the data stream to be something that is reasonable, you can begin to work through your response program so that these alerts and these events that are occurring in your environment, you have a way to then triage that event, get into the details and understand what is truly occurring, and if this is an event that involves risk or involves an external actor. So diving into a little bit of the response is getting into your incident response and readiness program. And Dan, I'll turn it back over to you to walk through what that really means.
Sure, thanks, Brad. Yes, so again, looking at finding weaknesses in your armor, part of that is you absolutely have to be prepared for if and when something happens. I think so. Another analogy I'll use, and this one that I like to use with people is I ride motorcycles, right? And if you've ridden motorcycles at all, you may be familiar with this expression, which is there are those who have put their bike down on their side, and there are those who are going to put their bike down on their side. It's just a common thing in the motorcycling world. At some point, something's going to happen, and you're going to tip the bike over. So that same analogy is, I think most of you will agree here in the cybersecurity world, with the way that threats are so pervasive today. It's a matter of, have you dealt with a security incident or potentially a breach already? It's not really, are you going to? It's a matter of, have you already, or you're going to at some point sooner than later. And that's just the reality of the world that we operate in today with the interconnectivity of our world. And so an important part of looking at your system and looking for weaknesses in it is making sure that you have an incident readiness and response plan. And a couple of high-level aspects of that are that will help your world immensely. And I will tell you, this is directly from myself as a practitioner and having been involved in many IR investigations in my career, especially in the last 5 years. But you will do yourself measurable good if you have very extensive implementation standards as you're deploying systems across your environment. Because when you get into a situation where you are potentially doing an investigation, having those good implementation standards is just key to having confidence in that investigation. Along with those implementation standards, playbooks. It's really important to have a good comprehensive environment that everybody is trained on, that is documented, and that can be referred to in a critical situation. Because I will tell you, when you're in those situations, things are flying at a million miles an hour. It's the nature of the beast, and so it's important to have your playbooks and everyone that's familiar with them and understands what their role is as part of that process. And then also to have automated response capabilities. That's also another important aspect. So if and when something does happen, you have the technology in place. It will go miles in terms of potentially mitigating or containing some of the reach of the scenario. Beyond that, so there's things that what's lurking beyond the castle walls, right? What's around the realm. That's where we also spend a fair amount of our time, and I recommend that people do as well. Looking for things like zero-day exploits. You always have to be on the lookout for that. Patch management programs, right? If you aren't keeping up with your patching, that is in my experience one of the biggest weaknesses in the armor that I find is that companies will have a patch management program of sorts, but it's either not kept up current or not given the attention that it deserves. As you can imagine, that represents a major opportunity for those bad guys to get in by not having patch systems. And then lastly, privileged access management. This is another key area. We all know as part of our roles, it is absolutely vital in our organizations to have privileged access management measures in place, hopefully through the means of a formalized system, potentially even a solution, but at the very least that you have it documented and then identified where those essentially where those accounts are set up and who has access, et cetera, and processes to deal with them when you have things like hiring, onboarding, and also when employees leave to retire account access. So along those lines, we'll shift it just a little bit, but still staying on the incident response concept. This is something I like to pose to people. I actually usually do this on the front end of when I give security presentations at conferences, and that is, so as you're sitting here listening to this webinar, the question I'm going to pose to you is, as you're sitting here listening to this, what if right now your phone starts ringing and someone says, hey, we might have a big problem? So my question to you is if that were to happen right now, do you know, or can you say with a high level of confidence that you know exactly what you would need to do? And what I mean by that is, so it's a couple of things. So number one, what is your first action? What would that be? And if you have to think about that and or you aren't 100% solid, then that is one thing I would encourage you to do as soon as you get done with this webinar. Go back with your core team and whoever's in charge of your incident response program and make sure that gets fleshed out, because that is one of the biggest things that can cause problems as you're trying to work an issue. And so I'll throw out an example, use myself as an example at different companies I've worked at. For me, when I've headed large programs like here at Newspire, oftentimes my first action was to, in a potential scenario, just pick the phone and call the lead general counsel. That's very common in a lot of big companies. If you have, especially if you have in-house counsel. If not, then it is typically a call to the the CISO, CIO, that kind of thing. And again, there can be various avenues and paths depending on what your role is within your company, as well as the role within the incident response team and plan collectively. So it's a very important question that you should be able to answer yourself. But secondarily, if you have members of a team that you have responsibility for, I would also pose that question in a slightly different way, which is, do you have a high level of confidence that each member of your team that would have any participation in an incident response, is it concretely solid in their minds of what they would do in the event that something comes to them first, right? That they need to be able to take action. So I would also spin it that way and ask you to think about that. And then secondarily is a close second thing is generally in these situations, senior management wants to be aware of things that are going on and kept updated. So do you have a good communication plan to keep your organization updated on anything serious, keeping in mind that, as you can imagine, when you get into a scenario like this, there's also a high level of sensitivity to what is shared and with whom, right? So it's important to have a predefined communication plan of who gets what, when it's received, who's authorized to disseminate it, et cetera. So those are just a few examples that I like to share with people and give some food for thought when you think about from an incident response plan perspective. And then you'll notice there on the screen, we do reference in there that we do have an incident response template that is available that we will share. And sorry, let's see if there's there you go. Wow, thank you very much. I'm guessing that was probably Amber. Perfect timing there, thanks. So yeah, if you look at the chat, for our members that are joining us today, if you look at the chat, she's included a link to our incident response plan template. So take a look at that when you have a moment. So Brad, I think I'll turn it back over to you, if that's okay. If you want to take a shot here at the summary, and me, I'll add my two cents in.
Certainly. So throughout all of this, we're making that reference to the castle, and it's an age-old analogy that is still relevant because there's still things to protect, and you need to understand what it is, what are the defenses that you have in place. And it doesn't really matter where your data lives, whether it's on premise, in the cloud, out in the realm, as it were. But with that, understanding first what it is that you're trying to protect, what are those defenses that you have in place and at your fingertips. So those are the knights. And then understanding within those knights, where are those knights' weaknesses? What are the weaknesses in their armor? Are your devices fully configured, and do they have the right visibility? Beyond that is understanding what your attack vectors may be and what threats are outside in that environment. What are you protecting against? And understanding really within that, do you have the proper visibility in place? Do you have the protections in place? And are you able to identify and respond when a threat activates? And then with that, when that threat does activate, what is your plan? Because at some point, and again, Dan, your motorcycle analogy was perfect. At some point, there will be a challenge to your architecture. There will be a challenge to your incident response plan. There will be a challenge to your processes and procedures. With that, have that plan in place, practice, so that you know how to respond in the event of that event.
And the last thing I would add onto that, thanks, Brad, is that I find in talking with most people, most organizations, they don't have those full capabilities in-house, right? There's usually a mixture of either in-house and/or leveraging partners to be successful, right, in defending their castle. And so, Brad's and my attempt here was to highlight some of the common challenges and things to really think about as you're working on continuing defending your company or your company's castle. We're hoping that you at the very least walk away from this with a better understanding of the complexity involved in really defending today's castles, and understanding that there's never a one size fits all type of solution, right? There's a lot of moving parts to having a good mature security program that I think the bottom line is that we'd encourage you to reach out, right, and find a good partner if you don't already have one, or if you're not happy with a partner, find a good partner that is going to help you continue along your security journey of protecting your castle. Because today's environment, it is so diverse, and the way the threats come at us. Honestly, I've been in cybersecurity most of my career since I got out of the military years ago, and I really am amazed every year at how the new threats just continue to come at companies, and how we have to evolve ourselves as professionals. And it's actually one of the reasons that I still love being in this field, 20 plus years after being out of the military. I really do enjoy it because it is challenging, and it's a constantly evolving landscape, and so affords us the opportunity to learn and grow continuously. So hopefully you've gotten something that you're able to take away from this. And of course, I would imagine Amber, sorry, I'm gonna check back to the chat here. I would imagine Amber will probably, if she hasn't already, provide contact information for us. You can certainly reach out if you'd like to discuss anything.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Guys, this was great. I do want to give folks a chance to submit any questions they have. We have one in the chat panel already, which I will get to in just a moment. If folks do have others that they would like to submit, I'll give you a second to do that. I'm going to do a really quick commercial break, though. Our next webinar is actually not until May 17th, but it is a big one. Newspire has a big announcement that we'll be making that day. We are leading the cybersecurity revolution, and we hope you'll come along and join us. So I encourage you to visit newspire.com/events to learn a little bit more about that webinar, and hopefully sign up to attend that one as well. All right, moving into our Q&A, we have a question from John. In terms of training employees how to react when there's a security breach, what if a company has just 10 employees? That's the reality in the world we're in. They're not all big organizations. Do you train them all, or just the supervisor? How would you guys handle that?
So I'll take a stab at this one first. So in my opinion, you have a certain advantage, right, with the smaller company, is because you don't have as many people to train and understand from a security perspective. And to me, when you talk about training, there's different levels. One is what I would say is general security awareness education, right? That's the SAE component. And I think that's a really important aspect of your security culture that you want to instill in your company, regardless of whether you have 10 employees or 10,000, right? Having a really good security awareness program is important. That being said, beyond that, I think it really, the other answer is it really depends on how involved those people are going to be if and when a breach does happen, right? I think that's going to dictate how involved they get. But I will tell you that part of security awareness programs that I've done in the past, they involve general awareness things like security types of like quizzes, if you will, right?
Phishing exercises. Yep.
Thank you. Phishing exercises from a technology perspective. And then also things like if you want to get more advanced, like tabletop exercises to kind of talk through what if scenarios. There's a lot of different aspects in terms of creating that security concentric culture. And that's what I would aim for, whether you have 10 employees or 10,000.
Yeah, and it's really a matter as well to add on to that is that every employee should have that constant awareness in the background so that if they think something is up, something's a little wonky, their computer's not behaving correctly, they say something. That's important. That they're a component of the visibility that you have to your environment. So if those employees are trained and they know that something's a little bit off, that they say something, that's the start of your response. And so that's key.
Yeah, I agree completely, Brad.
Brad, you remind me of those signs you used to see at the airports back when I got to travel. If you see something, say something. And I think that is relevant here.
That's exactly what I was just thinking of, Amber. Yeah, if you see something, say something.
Exactly. I'm mindful of time. We did have one other question that came in through the chat. It was just about how to quantify incidents. Is that something either of you would like to talk about, or would you like to follow up with this individual via email?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, with us running out of time, I think we would need to understand the details behind that. There's a lot of different directions I could go with that
Sure.
Question. So yeah, let's take that one offline.
Okay, we will follow up with you separately on that. And for anybody who perhaps we didn't get to your question today, you can certainly reach out to us at webinars@newspire.com. We're happy to answer any additional questions you have. And I will go to the last slide here that does have Brad and Dan's contact information if you have any questions directly for them. Other than that, like I said, first and foremost, thank you so much for your patience today with those technical issues we had, especially at the beginning. The recording of this session will be available to you shortly, and then our lucky prize winners will be notified soon. With that, I think we will wrap up today's session. I appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.